welcome to Just DAO It, the podcast for people starting DAOs. I'm Adam Miller, and I'm your host. I'm the CEO of MyDAO, which provides legal entity solutions for DAOs. And before starting MyDAO, I did consulting for people starting and operating DAOs. This is the first of 2 episodes this week where we will cover the recent news about DAOs with our guests. And later in the week, we'll dig deeper into an interview with our guests as well. Speaking of the guests, let's welcome our guests. We have Adam and Ed from Wonderverse. Adam, if you would like to go first, tell us just a little bit about yourself and what makes you an authority on DAOs.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam Miller, for having us on. Super excited to be here. Yeah, so I am one of the co-founders of Wonderverse, and we do Web3 project management tooling specifically for DAOs. So we've gotten to work with a lot of exciting projects over the last year. It's something that we're super passionate about, and I'm excited to explore more with you today.
Awesome having you here. And Ed.
Cool. Thanks for having us. My name is Ed. I'm head of partnerships over at Wonderverse. I guess what makes us authorities about DAOs is so far we've worked with over 300 Web3 projects. That includes DAOs, NFT projects, protocols, etc. With over about 20,000 contributors on the platform. So we've had a lot of conversations with whether it's operators and admins of DAOs or folks that are contributing to DAOs, just to get a better sense of like what's going on. And I think it's been a very interesting experience so far.
That's awesome. Well, it's great having you guys on the show. I've also talked to about 300 DAOs, but usually about their legal issues. So with our powers combined, we can have a really broad set of perspectives to bring to the table here. With that said, let's dive into the Just DAO It News Report, where I will summarize this week's stories for our guests and the audience, and then we will all dive into discussing what makes these stories relevant for DAOs. The first story of the week is from VentureBeat, and the headline is, Pay Your DAOs, How DAOs Work and What They Represent. I want to share a couple of quotes from this article that I like. The first one is, there's no doubt that DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, are changing the way people work, organize, and participate in their communities. We would all agree that that is for sure true. Another thing they mentioned in this article that I would think everyone would also agree with who's in this space, but I want to see what Ed and Adam think, is the article says these groups, i.e. DAOs, may be a bit difficult for the average person to get involved in. So let me turn it right over to you guys and see what's your reaction to those 2 quotes.
The first one, I mean, that's something we feel strongly about, especially, fair compensation. And for example, like on our platform, you could see how much work someone has done, what have they actually contributed. So I think like the movement towards that is super important. But the second one, and I don't know if this is a hot take, but I do think it is super hard to work with DAOs right now, just how they're currently formatted. Like for many DAOs to bridge from interest to actually being able to work with them is pretty far, like how it's run. I think that is what in the next year we all have to undertake, is how to make it as easy as possible. So not only can people who are tech savvy, but like long term, how is grandma getting involved in DAOs? That's the type of future we want to build where everyone can have a piece.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm thinking about a DAO that I'm a part of called DAO Planet, where we've had, I think like 1,000 people have joined our Discord, and they always come in by saying, hey, this sounds really cool. How can we help? And there's about 4 of us who actually contribute. So either nobody likes us or there's a bit of a onboarding and engagement problem.
Yeah, I think onboarding is like so crucial for the DAO space. I think in an environment where people are making decisions autonomously and teams are distributed and there's really no one like telling you exactly what to do, it does require a little bit of self-motivation and initiative. But barring that, like it is difficult to sort of jump in from, let's say if you're used to like a Web2 environment, to then just jump into this and like when nobody's in charge, like where do you start? So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of like onboarding people. Right now, I think a lot of it is actually unscalable because it's people running like weekly calls, people like doing one-on-one onboarding. I think what we've seen is probably more tools and processes to like actually help people onboard and get to know projects better. I think operations is very important in process design. Process design is not a really sexy thing, like even outside of Web3, but I think it's just like so crucial, and that's why like it's one of the things that we focus on with Wonderverse.
Yeah, I like that you brought up process design. I like to think also about organizational design, which is maybe even broader. A lot of people come into the space of DAOs, I think, feeling like not only should there be less top-down hierarchy and management, but there should be no structure, no process, do whatever you want. And but I don't think that actually works. I think that most DAOs are learning that, at least for most use cases, if you want everyone to work towards a common goal, you do have to have some kind of structure and some kind of process. It's just that it needs to be perhaps more open, more values driven. I mean, what are the other things that you would say? What's the difference between a DAO and a traditional company if you are introducing process and design?
What Ed was alluding to, I think a really big thing that has to happen, one is like mindset shift for a lot of people. So they come in expecting to have a manager to tell them exactly what to do. But a lot of these projects did come out and like you were saying, they have completely nothing. It's an open field. I feel like decentralized work doesn't mean disorganized. I actually think you have to take it's a bigger oath to organized work and fair compensation. So we have to actually be more intentional. And a big thing we've seen is there's a big move to more core teams in DAOs. So like what you were saying, how you had 4 people who are actually contributing. Usually that does happen in a lot of projects where some people are just super dedicated, and that's cool and that's important. But I think what makes DAOs different too is how do you get the people who come in and who are kind of more, on vacation exploring, and they can just come in, maybe do a couple bounties, do a couple tasks. And that's important too, because right now, most people will maybe have, 4 to 7 jobs throughout their lifetime. They didn't have a big variety. I think giving a system where people can go in and explore and contribute to hundreds of different projects throughout their lifetime makes for a much more interesting life with a wider impact. So I think having a design for people where they have a very structured core workflow, whether you're using sprints, agile, just typical methods, but you also have to have these elements where you have things that can be done in a decentralized way, like maybe social media management, blog management, a lot of engineering tasks, bug bounties, stuff like that. I think we need to have both something for the core team and for outside contributors that are important.
Cool. Love it. All right, let's turn to the next story for today. This one is from CoinDesk, and the headline is CFTC pushes back against Amicus briefs in Ooki DAO lawsuit. Lawyers for the CFTC served notice of the lawsuit against the DAO via a website help bot and a forum post. The 4 Amicus briefs say the CFTC wasn't playing fair. Partly covering this because we've covered it every week for the last 2 months. I think it has been a really interesting story that has gripped the world of DAOs, because there's a DAO that's getting sued. And not only is the DAO getting sued, but its members are getting sued by this US regulator, the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. This update is a little bit technical, but I still wanted to share it. There had been argument from organizations like, I think, Andreessen Horowitz, A16Z was one of them. They had filed with the court to say, we don't think it's fair that you served these DAO contributors by posting in their message board, their online forum. We think you should have had to find their contact info, write them a letter, put it in their mailbox like you would with a traditional lawsuit, or at least maybe find their email addresses. And so far, CFTC is pushing back and saying, which I think I'm kind of on their side in this one, if I'm being honest. If the DAO's primary method of communication is a web forum, then that's probably how you're going to serve the DAO. I don't know if we can have it both ways, saying, well, we want people to be able to just be a member with their wallet address, but at the same time, if you're going to sue them, you've got to figure out who they really are.
Like a disclaimer, I am not a lawyer, and like you said, it's a little bit more technical, but I do think that in terms of communications and expectations of communications is very important. I think to your point, a lot of DAO contributors right now, they connect their wallet to different projects and they start contributing most likely via Discord or Telegram or other communication applications. And TLDRs, I think I agree with you in that if that is the primary mode of communications, then I think the expectation is that you would, read the communication or read the papers that have been served to you. Yeah, I think this is also like in a different context though too, to be fair, right? Like in real life or like in Web2, you could easily find someone's address and contact information just from the company that they're working for, or even just like if you're a public figure, like you know exactly where to find them. But like in a Web3 context, like it is somewhat different. But I think as long as you meet the expectation of like we have a reasonable expectation that you will read the Discord forum or this Telegram chat, then I think it's fair to do that. But again, I am not a lawyer.
Yeah, I feel like I have to go through all my Discord notifications and see if I'm being sued right now.
Yeah. You know what? I was just having the
Yeah.
same thought, and that actually doesn't feel actually like effective to me because there's servers I just do not see, right?
Yeah, yeah. But there is the point though. Like if you're being sued, chances are you're probably a more involved member of that particular like server or group, right? So if that's the case, then I think it's fair to say that there's probably a higher expectation that you would check, like let's say your primary project's Discord server compared to like I'm sure we're all part of like literally like 100 Discord. I think I'm part of like 100 Discord servers, and to your point, Adam Miller. I don't check all of them, but I do check like one or two like on a very regular basis.
Well, here's the crazy thing, though, about what's happening in this case is the CFTC is suing anyone who ever voted on any proposal in the DAO's history. So it's not necessarily people that are more active. It's any. It's odd that they didn't just choose all token holders. They only chose token holders who did vote. And part of the dissenting opinion from one of the chairs or sub chairs of the CFTC was this is arbitrary. I mean, there's no law that says that in a DAO it's everyone who voted who's held responsible for the DAO's organization. Like this is regulation through enforcement. We should figure out first, like, who do you hold accountable in a DAO? Is a DAO treated like a general partnership in the eyes of the law? I will say too that I think one of the key lessons here, and I like the lesson because it's what we've been telling people at my DAO for the last year since we were founded, is that if you had a legal entity for your DAO, no one would be getting sued by the CFTC as individuals, right? The DAO would be getting sued as an entity. So especially if a DAO is engaging in some risky behavior like financial related services, it might make sense to form a legal entity so that your token holders almost certainly will not get sued. But in the case that you're not going to have a legal entity, this is something that people need to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. Yeah, it's also just fundamentally sad and appalling, I think, for these people. But in general, like when you're at the cusp of technology and you have gone past, like legal structures or court precedent, this always happens where, you're just years ahead and then they do things that you didn't even know you broke laws. So, I mean, that's what's tough. And that's why, the work you're doing is so important and it's stuff we think about all the time. So yeah, I hope that, everything works out.
Cool. Same here. And by the way, one thing I learned while I was researching this story is I used to say amicus brief when I saw this phrase. It turns out it's amicus brief. So now we can all sound a little bit smarter, especially amongst our lawyer friends.
Thank you.
Next article is from e27.co. The headline is 9 Things You Never Knew About DAOs. Now that DAOs have started creeping into wider company governance conversations, let's look at what you may not know about DAOs. So I like this because I actually give a talk at conferences called What You Don't Know About DAOs. I think it's a fun way to just start a discussion by trying to think of what's the thing that people don't yet know and try to share that with them. So I thought I might just pick 1 or 2 of these and we can dig into them together. I'll actually start with the first one. And I'd say most people that are like crypto native probably do know this, but a lot of people might not, which is that the largest decentralized exchange in the world is a DAO. So they're talking about Uniswap, which is probably the tool that the most people in crypto are familiar with of any tool that's out there, at least let's say any tool in DeFi, decentralized finance, that lets you swap one token for another token. And there is a lot of money that passes through this system, billions of dollars. I don't know if it's a day or a month, but a lot of money flows through the system. And Uniswap, I don't actually know if I would agree with the article that Uniswap is a DAO. Uniswap is a protocol that lives on the blockchain. It's an open source protocol that lives on the blockchain, but it is governed by a DAO. And so anyone who holds a Uniswap token gets to vote in what happens with that, with Uniswap in the future. Are they going to change their fees? Are they going to upgrade the software? Are they going to change something else about how the software operates? So I think that is it is a cool thing to note, and that's the direction that I think most crypto projects are going. I mean, DAOs are not just for crypto projects. I think that's something we've started to learn over the past year, is that people are starting DAOs to do literally anything you can imagine, from saving the rainforest to a high school chess club. I was just listening to a great podcast the other day where someone from Safe was talking about family DAOs. Like if your family wants to share ownership of an NFT and you do that through a DAO. But certainly major crypto projects like Uniswap either are DAOs already or using DAOs, or they're moving in that direction. Anything you guys would want to add? Or if you checked out the article too, feel free to pick a different one of the 9 things people don't know if you'd like to highlight that too.
I mean, I'm down for a family DAO, but I feel like my sister will be a whale. Like I'm gonna have, yeah, I'm gonna have no voting power in that one. Like what you're saying, like high school chess clubs, I think an important thing for people to think through, and I'm guessing this is like the next generation of DAOs too, is most people say they want to start a company or a nonprofit. It's like, what are the impacts you can make in the world? You get into for profit, nonprofit, government. Like those are the 3 big avenues. And I feel like DAOs, a lot of people actually want to start DAOs and they want to be involved in DAOs. They might not actually want to do a C Corp startup where they have to raise VC funds and dedicate the next X years of their life to something. Really, what they want, and a better solution in a lot of cases, is starting a DAO. Right now it is, just like crypto, and that's the main central theme for at least how we're talking about it on a global scale. But I think long term, it's for a lot of applications, it's better to have a DAO than a nonprofit or a for-profit company. And I think that's the thing that I'm super excited about, is making that as accessible to people as possible so they can start things and be builders and be creators without having to, start a company, start a nonprofit. So this new avenue, I think we'll see a whole new tool set, whole new ways to work together, and we'll see whole new ways to solve problems that we could never have imagined.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like it really is just like a decentralized autonomous organization, right? I think that can take like many forms. Like, I mean, even the DAOs and the projects that we work with, or even just like we see in the Web3 space, they're configured differently, right? They're configured in such a way that works for the collection of people that are working towards like a particular common goal. Like you said, whether it's like saving rainforests, whether tackling climate change problems, whether tackling like diversity issues, like it can take many forms. Like, but I think the key is like it is decentralized. You can make decisions more autonomously. And then to Adam Hayes' point, the structure, as long as it makes it easy for people to contribute and take part and actually move the needle for whatever project or vision that they have, like for this particular topic, all the better. I think it's just key to have ways to support that, to not be inflexible in terms of supporting it, because I don't think there's like a one size fits all. I think maybe the traditional way of thinking is that like, yeah, like a lot of things will consolidate, organizations will grow bigger and bigger by sort of like either absorbing other organizations or doing some sort of joint partnership. But I think like the Web3 space and DAOs, like there is an opportunity to actually, have many different organizations, working on very similar things, right? Because at the core of DAOs, I think is actually the people and not so much the organization structure, which supports it. To be honest, like because I'm fairly new to Web3. I've only been involved in Web3 exactly a year ago from today, where I joined the Wonder Discord server. Um, Vibes is actually really important, and I think every organization has a different vibe or culture or set of expectations on like how to act and like how to make decisions, and I think like that actually lends itself to not being or not moving towards the path of consolidation, right? So even if there's like 20 different groups tackling like climate change, it's completely okay because they're probably tackling it in different manners. And I think what we've seen is like DAOs or these groups are increasingly collaborating with each other. So it's they don't have to be absorbed into like one gigantic organization to make decisions. Like they could actually just make it like from like a DAO to DAO or organization to organization perspective.
Ken, I'm curious, the DAOs that you see using Wonderverse, your project management and collaboration platform for Web3, if that's a fair summary, are they mostly crypto-focused projects, like they're building something in Web3 and they're a DAO? Or do you also see a lot of what I'm seeing a lot of, which is saving the rainforest or creating a meetup group, a real life meetup group, right? Anything you can imagine that's not necessarily a Web3 project, but they're using the DAO structure.
Yeah, like we're definitely seeing that. I think initially, like a lot of the projects that were using us were more like crypto and like Web3 focused, but we're increasingly starting to see people that are tackling like non-crypto related topics using our product. Sometimes it's sort of tangentially related, but we've seen organizations where like they want to increase the involvement of like women building in tech, or like increasing like diversity in tech. Like that's not directly related to crypto, but in a way. But the common thread is still like chances are the person who like created the workspace is probably involved in a crypto project. That's actually how they know about us. But I do see a future where like I mean technically our product is, although we support a lot of Web3 projects, like there's no reason why like let's say an open source project or a high school chess club can't use our product.
Makes sense. All right, turning to the next story. This one is from Blockchain Council, and the headline is A Beginner's Guide to Understanding DAO Governance Models. DAOs are a new and evolving way of structuring organizations. These are organizations built on rules codified as computer programs that are usually transparent, managed by the organizational stakeholders, and uninfluenced by any central authority. Different DAO governance models exist, each with its advantages and drawbacks. I think this is a really cool. It's more of a guide or like a research piece than just an article. And I definitely recommend people check it out. The article goes into different types of DAOs, like protocol DAOs, investment DAOs, media DAOs, collector DAOs, and others, and then dives into examples of governance models that are used by specific DAOs like Constitution DAO, ENS, the Ethereum Name Service DAO, Friends with Benefits DAO, and others. I think this is a really cool topic because to me, one of the core things of what DAOs really are doing is they are inventing new forms of governance and new technologies on which to run even the old forms of governance as well. It's really all about governance in some ways. So I'm curious to ask you guys, what thoughts do you have on DAO governance models? Do you think that, first of all, that is core to what makes a DAO? And what would you advise people in terms of like what governance models might make the most sense or how to think about that?
This morning, I believe both Ed and I are members of FWB, and it was cool to get an email for voting on Snapshot about their mission, vision, values. It's just like taking democracy to the next level. I mean, usually, like we had voting on Tuesday, but now it's people get to vote and have a say in so many more places. I think this is like a true form of democracy, which is super exciting. However, with DAOs, it's super interesting because it's still early in the space, right? So you have so many different types of models, and it's like running an experiment. So does this work over here? Does this work over here? People are just testing. And I think there isn't ever going to be a one size fits all, but it's both dependent on what the project's doing and also what their resources are, what their long-term vision is. Because for example, like token weighted voting doesn't make sense for everyone. Maybe it should just be, single vote, single person for some projects. In other situations, that does make sense. In some situations, doing like a Spartan council where you're nominating members to represent you, so a more representative democracy. But also, I mean, what we're seeing is we are just taking remixing and blending of past things that we've had in systems we've already known. I think what I'm excited for is now that we have a new technology, let's create new systems and try new stuff. We haven't found a perfect way, and maybe there isn't a perfect form. We need to continue pushing to be innovative on the governance side. because really organizing people is a technology, and we should constantly be thinking, how can we innovate there?
Yeah, I love that. There's a couple ways of thinking about DAOs that I like to share. One of them is very related to what you just brought up, which is in some ways DAOs are like combining uh, democracy, like governments, with companies, and they're kind of somewhere in between, right? Like they're leveraging the governance, the decision-making structure of governments, of like cities up through countries and international bodies, but for the purpose of doing something that's often more like a company, right? Like a nonprofit, a for-profit, or a club even. So I think there is a lot to that. And the other one I like to use that's a little bit different is in some ways, DAOs are like nonprofit corporations, which generally speaking are run by a board. Right? It's only a board. There's no owners because it's a nonprofit. There's a board. Board makes all the decisions. Board elects the new board members. Board fires board members, et cetera. So I think DAOs are like nonprofit corporations where everyone is on the board, right? 100,000 people, 1,000,000 people all on the board, which would just be physically impossible with a traditional nonprofit because you can't count email votes and like sit around a Zoom or a physical boardroom with 1,000,000 people and have a discussion. But within a DAO, you can. And whether it's actually for profit or nonprofit, it's kind of like that's kind of the model where it's like everyone's on the board, and usually boards also engage in some kind of voting. Ed, anything you'd want to weigh in on in terms of DAO governance?
I just wanted to add to a point that you mentioned about like DAOs being like a combination or hybrid of like governments and companies. And also to what Wonderverse Adam has mentioned about like how we're taking ideas from the past or even from the present and incorporating into DAOs. I think what's really exciting to me about DAOs is and we kind of see this right is that DAOs evolve and same with their governance, right? Similar to like the real world, if there is anybody can well, not anybody, sorry, but you can make proposals on like changing even like the way that you make decisions or like making a bill or proposal to say like we now want ranked ballots instead of like whatever system you currently have. And I think like borrowing that idea like for DAOs is really exciting because it isn't one size fit all. Because I imagine like a DAO of like 5 people, the governance structure at that point is going to be extremely different from like let's say 2 years later they grow to like a community of 5,000. And I don't think it's like you went from like one model to another. There's probably actually multiple models of governance that they slowly evolved into. But the exciting part is that like you as a DAO member can actually participate and say like, I don't think that actually makes sense to us, and here's the reason why, and that you actually have a voice to influence the decision making process of like this evolution. So in a way, like like I would feel like this is much more democratic than yeah, it's a much more democratic way of making decisions, especially for governance.
Awesome. All right. The rest of our stories are actually tweets. So let's turn to the first tweet. This one is from David Phelps, who's at divine_economy. And the tweet is, regulation is coming. If you run a DAO where you hold the tokens and use them to make decisions to pay yourself out for actions performed, you might think twice if that's a security. You might want to embrace actual community-led governance that DAOs were made for. Not legal or financial advice, but all I'll say is that the people most excited about what we're building at Joke DAO tend to be lawyers. So there's a lot going on here. I don't think we're going to be able to dive into every issue here, like whether your token is a security, whether you should hold all the votes and pay yourself out, and what actual community-led governance might mean. And then finally, this concept that at Joke DAO, which actually a DAO I hear people talk about a lot, it's not just a joke, it's a way of testing and experimenting with DAO governance. It's interesting that the people most excited about it are lawyers. So I'm just curious if either of you would like to pick any one of those topics and dive into it in a little more detail.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Joke DAO. They're one of our partners, and I mean, what they're building is phenomenal. I think that's the use case is perfect for so many people to where they can do voting without having to launch their own, native token. So I, have talked with lawyers a significant amount about, and this is why I'm like interested to talk with you. So in your experience of what you think the best structures are, because we've heard things about like Delaware, like non-board, Colorado co-ops, like the stuff Wyoming was doing. I think the time into when people incorporate too is super interesting. Or sorry, when they pursue legal structure, because obviously, like you can't really like run a business for too long without at least becoming an LLC. So for me, I think something I'm kind of interested from you, Adam Miller, is when do you think it makes sense for DAOs to actually go for legal structure? It's not when it's just five friends, hanging around doing a chess club. Do they need to, or is it just when you're actually bringing in money when you only have a token, etc.?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll share a few factors. Firstly, you always want to get to a point where like something real is happening here, right? Like when a couple friends are like hanging out over drinks and they're writing on a napkin, like, hey, like we should start a company, we should change the world, we should go build this widget. You don't usually go the next morning and form your legal entity, right? It's probably going to be over the course of a couple months that you have some discussions and see if you really want to turn this into a project. Once you form the legal entity can have its own assets, right? Like its brand, like money. Even if you're holding the cash under your bed, like in a box, like if you say that that's the company's money, then it's the company's money. And if you run away with it, the other person can sue you. So it's also a way of ensuring that all the people involved, even if it's just two people, all follow whatever rules are set out. Like can't spend the money without, over 50% of us agreeing to do so. Finally, I'd say another key point is it's about risk management. So as soon as there's risk involved, like you're actually serving customers or signing contracts or building something that could hurt you or paying employees, which involves risks, or paying contractors, any of that stuff introduces risk where if you can afford it, you probably want to form a legal entity before you do that stuff so that you're protected from the personal liability, kind of like those Ooki DAO members could have been protected from personal liability with the legal entity. The other thing I'll add is that there are different levels of complexity around legal entities. It's pretty easy and pretty inexpensive to form like a Delaware LLC or a Delaware C Corp. Really, any United States based entity is usually pretty inexpensive, like hundreds of dollars, right? Up to maybe low thousands. When you start looking at what people in the US call offshore entities, which are really just entities outside the United States, those get a lot more expensive and sometimes more complex. And so like our product costs almost $10,000 to set up one of these DAOs in the Marshall Islands. That means 95% of DAOs, it's not even an option. But once they grow to the point that they've raised money or they have a lot of revenue and they want to think about what's the optimal global structure for this organization that we strongly believe is going to be meaningful in scope and size or revenue or risk or whatever, that's where you want to start looking at all the options in the world and putting together the best possible solution.
Yeah, exactly. Because a $10,000 investment for a small DAO, that's not the first money you spend. And I think
Right.
people, like, don't be afraid to start at a small scale. No one's going to be coming after you immediately. Like, it doesn't make sense. And then also, I'm sure as the industry grows too, that price, will be closer to, the $100 in the same way that, now that people are wanting to launch C Corps, they make it easier for people, more accessible. So like long term, it'll be easier for people to launch on with good legal protection too.
Yeah, and a lot of it actually comes down to the individuals involved too, because anyone who already is wealthy, right? Anyone who has a lot of financial assets, they will not be involved with any kind of project that doesn't have a legal entity because they're putting themselves at a huge amount of risk, right? Anyone who doesn't have any money or like has like thousands or maybe tens of thousands of dollars is not usually going to be as concerned taking the risk of being involved with a project because they just don't have as much to lose financially. So that's a big factor too. And by the way, there are solutions that are practically free. I think actually free. If you go to CaliDAO, which I think is at cali.xyz, oh no, sorry, cali.gg, that's a software platform for launching a DAO and running a DAO that you can also create this free series LLC, which is based off of one giant LLC. That's not a good long-term solution for any meaningful project, but it's a great solution right out of the gate if you want to have an entity the moment you create your DAO, now you have one, and later on you can transfer to a more expensive, more complex entity.
Actually, yeah, sorry, that's a really good point. Yeah, because I always wondered like if it's possible to, similar to like what we were talking about, like governance and evolution of that. Like, is it possible to also evolve the way that like your legal entity is structured? I imagine like it's probably like a process, but it's possible from the sounds of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. The one thing to think about there is generally speaking, when you create an entity, whether you used to have an entity or you used to not have an entity, at the moment you create it, you're actually giving it the assets of the organization. And so that's either you as individuals giving those assets, or that maybe you were keeping cash under your bed, but you didn't have a legal entity. Now you create the entity. That's like you and your co-founders are now giving that money to the entity. Or if you had an entity A and you create entity B, now you have to either give all of those assets from entity A to entity B, or you have to transfer ownership of entity A to entity B, or any other creative thing you can imagine. Is usually it's some kind of taxable event. And so that's the one thing to look out for if you're going to be creating an entity. That's another reason people should do it early on if they can, so that you don't have to transfer assets between entities later, potentially, again, creating a taxable event. So I love that we're going deep into this stuff because I love this stuff. But I'm going to move us to the next tweet, and we'll try to go pretty quickly through these last couple of stories or tweets. This tweet actually is about the podcast I brought up earlier. It's from Humpty Calderon, goes by Humpty. And the tweet is, timely episode with Shore Lucas, co-founder of Safe. We talk about smart contract wallets, how to use them, and the urgency to take ownership over our digital assets. So this was about his episode of Crypto Sapiens, of which Humpty is the host. It's a great podcast. Definitely recommend it. He has on one of the founders or leaders of Gnosis Safe, which is now going just by the word Safe. And it's a really timely episode because of what's happening with FTX and the, once again, like renewed concern that people have and probably always should have had about keeping your money on an exchange rather than keeping it with some kind of self-custody. And Safe is not just a safe for digital assets for organizations. You can actually use it as an individual, right? You can make your Gnosis Safe, right, which is like a smart contract that holds money for you, a 2 out of 3 safe, where the 3 people who hold the keys, they could all be you. You could be like, one of them is your MetaMask, one of them is your ledger, and one of them is just like a paper backup wallet that you keep in a safety deposit box. And now losing any one of your private keys does not give someone access to your money, and you don't lose access to your money if you lose it. And so I thought that was a pretty cool take, that actually Safe, kind of like Argent wallet is a wallet that's always been built as a multi-sig that's made for people to use as their personal wallet. They also, in the article, again, they do talk about DAOs and the concept of family DAOs or just any other situation. Actually, there's an application that I was thinking about for things like Wonderverse, which is, let's say a family wants to share a Twitter account. There's no way to do it because you're going to use an email address to sign up for your Twitter account, and someone's going to have like the ability to take that email address and like change the password and run away with it if they want to. But if a family has a Wonderverse account, if you guys allow for on-chain ownership of the account, then each person in the family has a private key that controls a safe that owns that Wonderverse account. Now you truly can have shared ownership of accounts on web services, Web3 services, et cetera. So I'm curious, actually, I know I've just said a lot of stuff, but does Wonderverse allow for people to own their account through a crypto wallet? And how do you think about that?
Yeah. So just addressing that point first, I like long term, something I'm super interested in is there's people who own, like anonymous social media assets. So I almost had a job actually where I would do social media buying. So like, this is a meme page that has 100,000 followers. How much do we value it at, et cetera? Like what would a good purchase price be to where we can make money off of it? I think that's stuff like that's a super interesting use case. And what you're talking about, is a perfect example where you can create a social media conglomerate that owns a bunch of different pages and you can essentially manage them. And then, for example, a benefit of being an owner is you could promote your product as an ad on the page once a month or something like that, like it's part of the contract or as the NFT holder. So I'm passionate about that. Right now, we don't do that yet, but long term, I mean, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And then just addressing your original point, yeah, I was at a Crypto Monday this week, and if you've never been to Crypto Monday and you're listening, just check them out. They're in a ton of cities. They're all over. Uh, and I think what basically was brought up is a lot of people didn't understand the difference between a centralized exchange and DeFi, like Uniswap, for example. Like for centralized exchange, and the metaphor that was used is use them as a bathroom, a public bathroom. Get in, get out. Like do your business and get out. Like don't keep your money on them. And I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, this is a failure of crypto," but I feel like that's actually not true because a lot of the philosophies of centralized exchanges aren't fundamental cryptocurrency philosophies. They're black boxes. You don't actually see what's going on. You don't have like a true ledger of actions. So I think this is actually like a strengthening the case for DeFi, and it's extremely hurtful. And I think there was just a lot of misunderstanding. But I think the push, for not keeping money on a centralized exchange is super important. So huge shout outs to Gnosis Safe. We love Gnosis. And if you ever go from 2 words to 1 word in your product, that's how you know you made it. So good for them.
And it's also how it gets really confusing because I feel like the word safe is like too general, right? Like now no one else can build something called a safe on crypto or it'll get confused with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what was it? Party Round just went to Capital. It's like those name changes. It's like, ooh, man,
right.
You're cooking now.
That's true. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point about FTX too. Obviously, that's like the biggest hot button issue right now for good reason. And I feel like some politicians and a lot of people outside of crypto see this as a failure of crypto. And in some ways it is of the overall crypto community because exchanges are part of the community. They sponsor our events and our shows and we hang out with them and we listen to them. We talk to them on crypto Twitter. But like FTX is TradFi connected to crypto, right? It's not actually DeFi. Right. So like this is just another example of why we need crypto in the first place, because stuff like this happens if you don't put everything on crypto.
Is FTX the sponsor of this episode?
No.
Okay. What's central?
Well, it raises really interesting questions too. Like I was just listening to Bankless this morning, which is a great podcast that we talk about a lot, and a great DAO, Bankless DAO. And they were talking about trusting Coinbase. Like they trust Coinbase. I also trust Coinbase. The people seem really good. They're fully US regulated, which should help. They talk about how every dollar is accounted for. They never lend customers money. They have all these things they do to make sure that it never happens. I do trust them, but like 2 weeks ago, people trusted FTX. And I just don't know if and how we can really figure out like which centralized institutions we actually can trust, or if we really should just not trust any of them.
Yeah, I hope this ages well. If this clip is like brought into Twitter like 4 months from now after Coinbase falls, that's not gonna look.
Yeah, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, you're in trouble. But
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think people just need to be very intentional and do a lot of their own research. What are you comfortable with? And then also, it's okay to have your money in multiple places too. But like putting your money with Gnosis is typically also, hopefully that also ages well.
Yeah. Yeah, true.
Yeah. Now you're gonna start everything you say. You're gonna say like, hey, hopefully this ages well.
Yeah. You should just have, to be honest,
at the bottom of the screen.
Cash in a shoebox underneath the bed, like you said. That you can never go
wrong.
Yeah,
there you go. You know what? Actually, I want to share our last tweet of the day, which we won't even talk about because we need to conclude the episode. But it goes along well with hopefully this ages well. So CityDAO says in their tweet, one of Google's early guiding principles was don't be evil. Since DAOs are transparent and democratic, they changed the mindset from don't be evil to can't be evil. Pretty hard to pull the rug when there is accountability and transparency. So I just want to leave the audience to think on their own about, is that really true that DAOs can't be evil? That does it for the Just DAO It News Report this week. Thank you so much, Ed and Adam, for joining me and being a part of this. Please make sure to tune in later in the week for the in-depth interview with Ed and Adam. For now, please let everyone know, where can they find you and your projects on the web and on social?
You can check out Wonderverse at wonderverse.xyz, or on Twitter, I believe it's Wonderverse_XYZ. You can follow me on Twitter if you want to, Adam_HA_yes, like ha yes. But Ed, it's a much better Twitter follow. What's your Twitter, Ed?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter with JackAlpha_XYZ, or you can contact me through email. I have a pretty open door policy because I work in partnerships. You can email me at ed@wonderverse.xyz, and I will respond.
Hopefully that ages well too. You don't get spammed by everyone. And you can find me on Twitter at 0xthriller. MyDAO is at MyDAODS. That's MIDAODS, or MyDAO.org. And are you thinking about starting a DAO? Just DAO it. Just DAO It is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Just DAO It does not contain any legal or financial advice. MyDAO also does not provide legal or financial advice, and nor does your host, yours truly.